Okay, welcome everyone to this Rocha Talk. And we titled this one, What is it like to be a Christian observer at a UN climate conference? Very direct, very descriptive. That's what we're going to talk about. Not particularly jazzy title, but you know exactly what this is about. So if this is what you want, this is the place for you. My name is Rick Faw, and I'm the Education Director for Rocha Canada. And first off, I want to acknowledge that I am coming to you from the ancestral and unceded lands of the Coast Salish First Nations, particularly Semiahmoo and Kwantlen. And the rest of us are from various regions of Turtle Island. And feel free to put into the chat something about where you're from. Bonus points if you can name like your watershed or perhaps the indigenous folks that have lived for a long time, where you're coming from. For those of you that are new to Rocha, I want to say a few words by introduction just to know about what Rocha is. Rocha, the name means the rock in Portuguese. We got this name because Rocha started in the early 80s in Portugal. So nowadays, fast forward 40 years, and Rocha is a global network that consists of Christians caring for creation. And we do this by working through community-based nature conservation projects. And we do this in over 20 countries around the world now. And in each place, it's adapted, like the work is adapted to the specifics of the bioregion or the watershed where the work is happening. And you can learn more about where we work at rocha.org. That will get you to our global family, or rocha.ca will get you to our Canadian work. In Canada, our vision is to transform people and places by showing God's love for all creation. And we currently have study centers in BC and Manitoba and Ontario, as well as smaller partnered projects in different regions. And these centers each demonstrate our commitments in diverse ways, but they hold a kind of commonality to them. So for instance, if you visited the site near where I live, here in the Tataloo River watershed, you would see a working 28-acre field study center with a team of biologists that are researching sensitive habitat and species at risk and actively working to restore whatever health can be restored to them. You would also meet an education team that works with kids from like preschool to seniors. And the education team gets people outside, actively learning about how nature works, about forests and rivers and wetlands and agriculture. You'd also see a small organic farm where there's a team that grows vegetables and then distributes those vegetables through a kind of direct to neighbor share structure. And we're talking about a few hundred households that would be involved with that. And you'd also find a residential facility where there are 6 households that live on site, as well as those of us like me that kind of commute there. There's seasonal, what we call residents, people that come, think of it sort of like an internship program, but we call them residents. And there's a total, like the people that live on site, as well as those of us that commute in the neighborhood, particularly in summer, we're probably more than 30 staff. Now, this is the biggest one, so the other centers maybe not quite that large, but that's what you would find here. And all of us, we're trying to work together to live a little more lightly on the land than perhaps we're used to, or at least our culture is used to. And we're trying to seek to embody humbly how faith in a living, loving creator can shape our lives and our lifestyles. That's what we're trying to put into practice. So let me just say before moving on further, again, if you please check out our websites, or better yet, if you are close enough to one of our centers that you could actually come and visit, we love that. Zoom calls are great. Zoom recordings are good. Coming in person to join us for lunch is even better. So try that, check that out. We'd love to have you get in touch, and perhaps we can meet in person sometime. So that's a bit about Rocha. Now, Rocha Talks. So this is the latest installment of Rocha Talks. We do these occasionally. It's been a while since we've done one of these. And in them, we like to dialogue about issues of faith and how those relate to being and living as human creatures and how our lives intersect with the world of creation. And tonight, our plan is to explore a bit about how some of God's people are responding to a changing climate. You've probably heard somewhere along the line about these annual gatherings that the United Nations hosts, the ones to talk about climate change and try to mobilize action and progress. So the UNFCCC, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, hosts these annual events. And one of the things that Rocha Canada is involved with is a partnership called the Christian Climate Observer Program, or for short, CCOP. You'll probably hear CCOP referenced multiple times in this session today. So the Christian Climate Observer Program is this collection of organizations, Rocha Canada is one of them, that pool our resources and we send people to one of these COPs. So tonight, we're trying to hear from the people who have participated in that. So we have with us a number of alumni of the program, and we're hoping to get a kind of insider's view of what it's like to be present at these global climate discussions. So I'm delighted to have with us Monica Tang and Elsa Barron and Sarah Demian, all of which have been to one of these. And we've invited them here today to reflect on what it's like to be there. So we'll do that for roughly half an hour or so. We'll get them to talk about their experience and how that's shaped them since then. After a while, we'll switch gears and we're looking to interact with questions from those of you that are joining the call. So if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat, or if it's small enough, you can just we'll unmute and voice the question yourself. But we're aiming to be done in about an hour from now. That's when we'll kind of call it quits and be done. Now, we are recording the session, so in a few days, I think I mentioned this, that we'll put it online. So what that means is, for the recording purposes, it's helpful if you stay muted and your video off, at least for this first section. So that would be appreciated. It'll just help make the recording and the editing go a little smoother. Okay, so with that introduction, let's get to know our guests. So question for each of you. Start off, tell us a little bit about a few things, where you're from, which COP is Conference of the Parties. This is the gatherings. Which COP did you attend and what year was that? And maybe briefly, what's something about you and what you're doing now that you'd like to highlight? Maybe it's your job or your school or where you volunteer with or something like that. So let's start with you, Monica. Can you introduce a little bit about yourself?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Monica Tang, and I currently live in the Metro Vancouver area, home of the Coast Salish Hunkaminam speaking peoples in the Fraser River watershed. And this has been my home. And even though I've lived in other parts of Canada, I've returned to come back to live and work in Metro Vancouver. I attended COP25 in Madrid in 2019, was the one of the very first participants of the first cohort of the CCOP program. And I have a couple of different hats that I wear, but for the purposes of, I think, what is most relevant to this conversation, I'm on the board of directors for Citizens for Public Justice, which is a ecumenical, Christian Reformed based, but ecumenical nonprofit organization working on public policy, research, and advocacy in areas of reducing poverty in Canada, refugee and migrant rights, and the part that is closest to my heart, ecological and climate justice.
Thanks, Monica. That's great. How about you, Elsa?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me today. So my name is Elsa Barron, and I'm calling in now from where I live in Washington, D.C., here in the United States, which is on the ancestral homelands of the Nicconchunk people. And I'm originally from the Chicago area, so I moved out to DC for my job, which focuses on researching the intersections between climate change and especially climate impacts and conflict risk and then peace building opportunities to kind of address these often overlapping challenges, trying to ensure that policy is prepared for the coming climate change world that we're living in now, and then obviously preventing that from continuing. So that's what I do in terms of the CCOP program. I first went to COP 26 in Glasgow in 2021, and then I also attended COP 27 on the leadership team, and so I got to meet Sarah through that, but I think I'll be focusing on kind of my first time CCOP experience in Glasgow.
Yes, you, Elsa, I first met you in Glasgow because that was my first and only time to visit one of these COPs. So we share that that experience in Glasgow. What about you, Sarah?
Hi, I'm Sarah, and I'm currently in Langley at Trinity Western University campus, and this is the traditional and unceded ancestral territory of the Solo people. So I'm currently on campus because I do research discussing invasive species, specifically knotweed, climate change, and faith. And so we do both field study looking at the atmospheric flood effects of the Chilliwack River, and we're doing in-lab work as well. And I'll be presenting at the ASA CSEA conference in Toronto this July, just talking about how that connects with our faith and how as Christians, it's not something to be afraid of, to be discussing topics such as this. And one thing I'm really excited for going forward is the Planetary Health Club that my school is introducing in September. So right now, I'm going into my 4th year of university, but in my 1st year, I joined the Environmental Club, and we're transitioning to the Planetary Health Club, and I'll be the vice president, and I'm really excited for that transition. And I attended COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, and that was a very influential and incredible experience for me, especially as someone who's half Egyptian and my first time in Egypt. So I am so thankful to have that opportunity and to be here to talk about it today.
Wow, thanks, Sarah. And just to one little point of clarification, you're going to be presenting soon at, you said the ASA CSA. What's that? For those people that don't know what that is, what is that?
Yeah, American Scientific Affiliation and the Canadian Scientific Christian Affiliation, joint collaboration.
Yeah. Sweet. Okay, well, we'll get to CCOPs proper and like the experience at these big gatherings in a moment. But first off, like you kind of, it's clear you all three of you are pretty invested and active in this space, so to speak. But how did that start? So my next question is like, give us a little sneak peek. Maybe not the entire narrative, but at least a little bit about your origin stories when it comes to like, why do you care about this stuff? And maybe this time, Elsa, can we start with you this time?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, growing up, I was always really interested in the environment. I was really, in particular, obsessed with sharks and their role as a keystone species and the ocean ecosystem. And so I think there was always a part of me that was drawn to these topics naturally from a very young age. But I also grew up in a more conservative Christian tradition that had a lot of skepticism around mainstream science. So for me, there was all of this tension growing up with my kind of natural interest in science and then my strong faith community, feeling like maybe those two didn't align or challenged each other. And so I wrestled a lot with that going into college and studying biology and starting to do research and loving it. And kind of that like big picture wraparound moment for connecting faith and science, particularly in light of climate change, was reading Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si at Notre Dame, which is a Catholic university. I think I read it like 5 times in different classes while I was there. But just really seeing the theological roots of the climate crisis, the impacts that we're called to care about, and then how that was connecting to the science that I was studying, but also issues of justice and peace and conflict was really what kind of solidified this as the area that I wanted to go into in my work and advocacy as well. So that's a little piece of my story.
I gotta say, I'm a little jealous that you were reading Laudato Si at Notre Dame. I think that might be a little bit, it would be, I mean, it's a good, if you haven't heard of it before, it's well worth looking up. But to read that at a institution that is so steeped and connected with Catholicism, that would be special. Sarah, can you go next?
Yeah, so for me, I also grew up in a Christian home and climate change wasn't discussed, but my mom was very much influential in terms of sustainability. So composting, recycling, everything like that was well explained to us and understood at a young age. I later moved in elementary school to a city that didn't have any composting program or really poor recycling program, and she would like go out of her way to go to local like depots and make sure it's properly recycled. And so in my head, I never made that connection to climate change, but it took some time. I think it was middle school when I was at a friend's house and we made cookies. And after we were done taking a few, she just threw the rest away. Like within the 5 minutes, we took it on her plate. And I was shocked. And I went home and told my mom, and I was saying, like, she just threw the food away without like no leftovers. And in my head, because I grew up so that was not at all like what we did, it sparked so much thought, and I still think about it. And I started looking into how food waste kind of impacts our environment and our lifestyles. And then as time went on, more food waste or clothing related, like fast fashion, was something that I was very much interested in. And I was entering into university and I wrote a scholarship essay on why Trinity needs a better composting program. So I won the scholarship and I promised to myself that I'd actually make sure that that is something that we were taking care of. And so I joined the environmental club and definitely brought that up from the very beginning and kind of went off from there. So I would say just growing up in a home that discussed sustainability made a big difference.
Well, that's really cool, Sarah. I'm also a Trinity Western alum, so I know where you are, and I was the student there a long time ago. So I'm glad that you're advocating for the composting. Back then it was, well, they've made strides since then, but it was there was a few other battles to fight back then. Monica, can you tell us a little bit how you got started?
Well, yeah, I grew up in a Chinese Canadian sort of immigrant household. So I would say that it wasn't necessarily the angle of climate change and sustainability that was part of my formulation, but certainly just the concept of not wasting food, using everything that came up and not wasting anything were pretty sort of standard maxims in the household where I grew up. I was very fortunate to grow up in a part of Metro Vancouver where we had access to the Burrard Inlet. So growing up and learning how to sail on the Burrard Inlet, having sort of our school sort of phys ed activities out in the natural park just shaped my love for the natural environment around me, and just was inspiring me to take care of the environment around us. I did my work experience internship in high school at a local salmon hatchery and ecological society out in that area, and just learned to love the 6 kilometer municipal park that was part of my upbringing and educational formation. And in university, I studied political science with a focus on with public policy and environmental studies. And I think I would say that I spent most of my early young adult and some of my adult life just trying to find the integration between what I was learning at university, which was around environmental sustainability and creation care without that label, and also just attending a church and evangelical, standard, non-denominational church that didn't talk about any of these things. So the rest of my formation was spent at the Regent College Library and Bookstore, just reading through books by theologians, including Jim Wallace, Ronald Sider, and Howard Snyder, just trying to find that a connection point. Trying to find those connection points. And finally, after a couple of years after I graduated from university, I had the opportunity to attend Urbana, which is an InterVarsity Christian Fellowship international conference. And they had an entire track on marketplace ministry with some workshops on creation care, and that was where I think years of searching for integration finally met together, and that started my journey with CCOP and with Citizens for Public Justice and an ecumenical kind of a faith-based approach to creation care.
Wow, fascinating. Thanks so much for all of you sharing that. So that sort of sets a little bit of the background of kind of like who you were and how you've grown up. But it still doesn't quite explain, how you got to be at one of these COPs, one of these Conference of the Parties. But when you did get there, when you did get to one of these COPs, my experience of going to one of them was that they're overwhelming affairs. Like there are tens of thousands of people all jammed into this small location, all milling about and clearly purposeful and moving fast. And there was literally dozens and dozens of some sort of seminar or talk happening simultaneously. So there's so many things to navigate, never mind the logistics of travel and so on. So that was just a little bit of my initial sort of first blush reaction. But I'm curious for you, can you paint us a little bit of a picture of some component of this what can be a flood, a sensory overload kind of dynamic? What is some little portion of that you can like describe for us to give us a little bit of a sense of what's it like to be at one of these global gatherings with people from literally every country around the world? So who hasn't started yet? Sarah, I don't think you've started yet. How about you start this one?
Yeah, I think the large amount of people was actually a huge wake up for me in terms of the fact that it was people from all over the world, and the diversity was so appreciated, because maybe just from my circles, generally when we talk about sustainability, it's not super intersectional. And so I really appreciated it coming from so many different perspectives and talking about how they're personally influenced. So I'm just thinking about, like, we'd walk into a huge room with, overall at these COPs, by the way, there are about 35,000 people. So you can imagine a lot of people. And you would go to any of these pavilions and people would introduce climate initiatives or something that their organization or country is taking on. And so as an observer, I really appreciated hearing about how different countries are approaching problems within that their country can make an impact on. And one that really comes to mind is Turkey. They had a beautiful art kind of exhibit where they showed recycled materials and made canvases with it. And I think this is so beautiful and for me, because I'm a science student and I'm always interested in science. And I think I forget about how it actually affects every one of our subjects in school. And art is a huge thing, how we express ourselves. So just looking at one of those things, I'm reminded of all the materials that are generally considered waste, but also how one person sees that and thinks of beauty when they see like recycled fabric or broken cords. And so those were, that was one pavilion I really enjoyed. And WHO, the World Health Organization, had a wonderful pavilion I attended probably every day. I really liked their public health talks as somebody who wants to pursue a career in medicine. And I really liked the connection that our human health has on our environment, because it's so obvious in terms of lung health and air quality, but it's not often discussed. It's usually in at least kind of Christian or university circles, we seem to think of smaller things. And it's really nice to bring it to how, whether you understand climate change or accept it or not, it's still affecting everybody. And so it's something to be aware of.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I remember the WHO pavilion in Glasgow, and yeah, they had some really fascinating talks. And the turkey and art. Wow, I don't remember that one. So that sounds really fun and stimulating. So Monica, how about you? What do you remember from Madrid? And give us a little snapshot of something that struck you when you got to Madrid.
Yes, I came into the CCOP program having been involved in a local, a local group called the Earth Keepers, which was a very just kind of a locally focused, Christian faith-based organization, mostly focused on stopping fossil fuel expansion in the Metro Vancouver area. So I was quite drawn to what faith-based movements at the at the COP experience would look like. So I actually kind of similar to Urbana, I just kind of designed my own kind of CCOP track around, meeting other organizers and meeting other sort of faith-based movement, just participants, and going to their workshops and side events. So a lot of these were not officially part of the pavilions. There were side events that they had as workshops or as sessions at some of these pavilions. I was just interested in seeing how people even of different faith backgrounds would organize their own faith community around climate change, and some of the strategies that they had used. Some people were involved in advocating in international institutions like the UN in Geneva. Others were interested in more sort of campaigns that were built around public awareness. So there was a march and a demonstration, and a number of these were about calling out countries that were greenwashing and companies that were greenwashing. So there was a range of activism approaches that these different groups were utilizing to draw awareness about climate change and about solutions. So I just felt encouraged that the group that I was involved in Vancouver, that there were a number of people around the world who had similar groups, similar concerns. Some of them were Christians, others were from other faith backgrounds. Some of them were ecumenical, some of them were interfaith, and just wanting to see what it was like to be a Christian in a space in the public square, but being clear that our involvement and our activism and our participation is an expression of the faith values that we have, and our love for the created world.
Yeah, that I learned recently, just it confirmed today actually, that there is going to be a faith pavilion at the next COP. So, I mean, you were in Madrid. So what year was that again, Monica?
2019. That was
2019.
there was no official pavilion. It was mostly just as part of the COP, sort of not official UNFCCC experience, but a number of groups that would converge upon Madrid would then just organize their own workshops and their own sessions.
Yeah.
Pretty much almost a parallel.
Right. Yeah. There was something similar in Glasgow. I wonder what it will be like this time for those that go this year, with having an actual pavilion there focused on this. That'll be interesting. Elsa, give us a little snapshot that you remember from your kind of first impression of this mass of humanity, and all carrying and are all there to talk about climate change for one reason or another.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think Sarah and Monica did a great job sort of setting the scene, and I fully agree that it's really overwhelming and also very invigorating, at sometimes overwhelming, to be in the COP space. But I'll maybe share a different direction of the story, which is also how small of a world it can be, especially when you start to engage and get to know the climate community across the world. There's actually so many different connections. And after COP26, one of the things I had the opportunity to do there, outside of the UNFCCC space as well, was do a little documentary project with Climate Action Network Europe. And I met a couple of other youth activists there, and we asked each other some questions for this film, and it was a really meaningful experience. And then at COP27 in Sharm el Sheikh, the first weekend, I went with a group to the grocery store to just kind of like pick up some goods, and the store was packed with climate people. And I ran into someone from this documentary from the previous year. And then as we were chatting, a third person from the documentary sort of like pulled up in the aisle, and we had a little reunion and all remembered very vividly the experience we had had and compared notes on what we were trying to accomplish this year. And so I think it can be incredibly overwhelming, and there's a lot of energy, thousands of people, but it turns out to be a small world as well. And I think those relationships can be very meaningful in the COP and then beyond, as well as in the way that we continue to collaborate with each other.
Yeah. Wow. There's people coming from all over the planet. There's thousands of them there, and you bump into a couple that you've already known. That's remarkable.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's a good segue, because I think the next question I want to ask is more like, it's one thing to, in my memory at least, to engage sort of the conference of the parties as a whole, like this entity. But some of the things that stood out to me most were the one-on-one interactions, the engagements with a particular person. And also, you're already kind of, alluding to the significance of that. But I want to draw that out more specifically. Like, so maybe starting with you, Monica, like who is a person, or what was an encounter that you had with a person that has a name? Like, I mean, of course, everybody has a name, but I mean somebody who has a name for you. Like, as in you, I don't know, it could be a lecture or a seminar, I suppose, but at least you knew who the person was. Or maybe it was a chatting over lunch, or in the aisle of the grocery store. That could be that. But like, what was an encounter that made a particular impression with a particular person that made a particular impression on you?
It was at one of the side conferences that I went to during one of the days. I was organized by Dominicans for Justice and Peace, and I think I was probably one of the fewer participants there who were from, I guess, one of the G7 kind of global North countries. Most of the participants were from either Catholic or Lutheran or other sort of delegations from Latin America and from South America. And it was mostly a conversation that we had over lunch, and I was just sharing a little bit about some of the work and the campaigns that our local group was doing around fossil fuel based expansion, opposition to that, and this was actually partially through the help of a translator, because I was still learning Spanish, and most of the other delegates were speaking Spanish. So our workshop facilitator kindly simultaneously interpreted so that we could have a conversation over lunch. And I was just showing them some of the photos of the terminals that are being built here in Canada, and some of the pipeline work and the terminal that were being built. And the conversation turned to treatment of Indigenous peoples and major projects and natural resource projects. And the other delegates who were from Central America and from South America just also shared about experiences that their church had, or in like working in solidarity with Indigenous peoples, and just the impacts of how major corporations treat Indigenous peoples, and some of these issues that are common across countries, that it's not just in Canada or in the global South. There is a common theme around just corporate behavior, corporate responsibility, government enabling, and the intersection of what we are called to do as people of faith, and how we all sort of navigated through that space. So it wasn't at an official event. It wasn't a lobbying meeting or anything like that. But for me, that just that experience stayed with me. That there was solidarity and there was similarity in terms of the spiritual issues that we were both facing as Christian delegates in this space.
Well, yeah. I've lost track of the order and so on, but Elsa, can you share something about a particular person?
Yeah, absolutely. Someone who I thought of with this question was actually again, kind of outside of the gates of the conference, there were usually protesters or, various other gatherings sort of outside of the security barrier, entering into the blue zone, which is where like all the conference events are taking place. And there was one group that was singing one of the mornings as we were coming up, and I kind of like stopped to linger for a little bit to listen. And they had a coat of hopes is what they were calling it, which was a piece that had been quilted from little squares that people across the entire UK had created, showcasing little images of their hopes for the future that had then been sewn together into this big coat. And they were inviting people to put it on and to share in that. So I got to wear the coat, but I also got to talking to the drummer who was kind of playing the beat for the music there. And he was telling me he's a part of the interfaith branch of Extinction Rebellion, which is called XR Faith Bridge. And just talking with him about kind of his perspective on repentance and how much how lacking that is in the climate conversation, especially when it comes to technological solutions and policy and negotiations. Like those are really important, but that we also need repentance. And that's kind of what they were building as the foundation of this code of hopes. Like the repentance allows us to move into the future and allows us to hope. And that conversation really stuck with me, and I stayed in touch with this individual through social media, and we met up when I was visiting London another time. And so again, just like another example of how it's not just the conference and then you leave and it never comes up again. It really does stay with you.
Yeah, for those of us that have participated in worship traditions that are particularly liturgical, confession and repentance comes before absolution, which comes before like blessing and commissioning. So it makes a lot of sense that if we're going to talk about what we got to do, well, there might be a few steps before that, and repentance is definitely a part of that. Sarah, who was somebody that you spoke with? And
yeah, I had amazing conversations there, but I think one kind of conversation that I always think of, because it just made me smile so much, was I was kind of walking behind the Princess of Morocco. She was going to her booth, and so as she was walking there, I was just curious. I was with people, and we were just curious where she's going into, and we see her going, and we're standing outside her booth at this point, and somebody says, "Where are you from?" And we say Canada. And she said like, "Oh, you look Egyptian." At the time my hair looked curlier, it's kind of straightened now, but I was saying like, "Oh yeah, I'm half Egyptian." And the person behind me said, "I am half Egyptian and I'm Canadian." And then I was like, "Oh, that's bizarre." And then the next person beside us said that, because this person who just spoke moved from Canada to Egypt last year. And the next person just spoke and said that, "I grew up in Egypt and I just moved to Canada 2 years ago." And it's so funny because the rest of the conference, I rarely met any Canadians except Canadian zones, like the Canada booth or the Canadian kind of over large, I can't remember the name of the kind of event. But other than that, I didn't meet any other Canadians except this one conversation. And we were just laughing because it's so funny that exactly what Elsa was saying about it being a small world and us having these similar interests and maybe similar lifestyle. And it was just kind of brought home the idea that we're all in this together, and now we're all in different areas of the world, but similar kind of idea of what a home should be. And I think we all can agree that a home is a healthy place for everyone. And so we had a really great conversation talking about what we think of climate change in Canada and how it's addressed within the government, which was cool because these were two Egyptian people I was talking to who were very knowledgeable about how it is in Canada. So I thought it was really fun kind of thing to look back on.
Wow, you travel all the way to Egypt to talk to somebody from Canada or talk about Canada. Wow, that's a little unexpected, but yeah. Well, I'll interject here. if those of you others on the call, I don't have to be the only one asking the questions. So if you have questions that you'd like to ask, feel free to either raise a hand or put them in the chat or something like that. Probably the chat is in some ways the easiest or simplest for us to incorporate. I'll keep going. I got plenty more questions, so I'll keep going. But if you do have something that you'd like to ask or contribute, then by all means do so. I think the next one that I will ask is this is the, okay, so I'm getting, we're getting the sense of the picture, what it means to travel to this other place. You meet with people from all around the world. There's at least some conversations, one-on-one or more intimate conversations that can sort of stick out in your memory and in our memory as people who have attended. But what difference does it make, or what difference has it made? What is the impact that this has happened, this whole experience has had for you? So you go there, but then you come back to so-called regular life. And I'm curious, like how have you seen a shift in yourself, in your posture with the world, or maybe it's a shift in your network? So a couple of you already alluded to, like, hey, I just know different people now, and that opens up opportunities that way or something. So say something about what the impact has been. And maybe Sarah, I'll start with you this time, because
Yeah, the impact. So I initially heard of the CCOP program through my research supervisor at Trinity. And my thesis project is talking about Chilliwack River, and since 2021, the flood that happened, how many more growth of knotweed are we seeing along the river? And so I went with that. And when I came back from COP27, you have to incorporate that somehow. Like, that was so changing in my opinion that it had to be put on paper. And that influenced my research in terms of now, obviously this presentation I discussed that is happening in July, but also with my research supervisor, how we're changing my thesis with introducing faith and more specific discussion about climate change instead of just that specific river. I'm also looking at extreme heat. So we're working with growth chambers now to see how that impacts the plant. And I think for me, it was really neat because it was something I was already kind of working on, my thesis and thesis proposal, but making it more fine-tuned to discussions that are super important for this moment. And at a Christian university, I think it's so nice to take advantage of that perspective and to talk about faith within my own thesis, because at CCOP, it was nothing to shy from, that your faith has so much connection to it. So that for sure impacted what I'm going forward now in terms of finishing up my degree.
Yeah. Now, Monica, you've had a little bit, like Sarah just went last year, so we're talking a few months ago that Sarah was in Egypt. But when you were in Madrid, that's you've got a few years now. So I'm curious, with a little bit longer time, what have you seen as some of the longitudinal, that's the technical research term, but like the over time impacts of your experience in Madrid?
Yeah, it's a good question, Rick. I've been thinking about how do I answer how do I answer this question in a short, pithy panel length appropriate response. I'll start with just mentioning that it had both a spiritual and vocational impact on me. So spiritually, I would say that meeting other Christians around the world who are already experiencing very dire and severe climate impacts just prompted me to have a more regular and specific intercessional prayer approach to praying about climate change. So I, along with Samuel, I've joined the Climate Intercessors kind of network, and have been faithfully attending for the last couple of years, ever since the network has been stood up. And then vocationally, the experience again of being at the COP conference, meeting other international Christian, meeting other Christians who are from different international backgrounds, seeing how different social movements work from a faith-based context. I've brought some of those into my experience at Citizens for Public Justice, where I chair one of their advisory committees for programs and campaigns, and bring that lens into, quite frankly, as Canadian Christians, we really need to do some myth busting about Canada's actual climate performance, and our role and contributions towards our historical contributions to to the climate crisis, as well as the role that Canada does need to play. So I've been sort of advising them and having some influence in how we shape our campaign, some of those priorities, some of the framing of those issues, and I've brought that into mostly the nonprofit work that I've been doing. Just recognizing that it is a privilege to be able to attend an international conference like this one. A lot of Christian NGOs working in Canada, from the Christian sphere, don't have a lot of staff or delegates who have the opportunity to attend these conferences because of the time and the cost and the all of the resources that are required to attend this. So I've been wanting to be intentional about bringing some of those experiences and perspectives back into how we shape our domestic policy asks and our international policy asks, and how we frame those issues with our constituents and with the folks that we hope to influence.
Yeah, that's a lot, and I know enough about some of your life and work, Monica, that I know that's still sort of scratching the tip of the iceberg, I think. But thanks for giving us that little snippet. Also, what about you? I mean, you mentioned earlier that this is occupational. You have a job that is focused on climate. But I'm curious to what extent you can identify how your experience at one of these COPs in the CCOP program, how that impact has played into the rest of your life.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, the three of us, when we described the COP, described it very differently and with different pictures, and like piecing those together, you can get a good idea. But I think it just exemplifies how challenging it is to really conceptualize the conference without being there, and also to conceptualize just how these international decisions about climate change are being made. And so I think for me, coming into a job shortly after COP26 in Glasgow, I started, that wrapped up in November, and I started my job in January. So just 2 months later, and I think going into a job very focused on policy and how to conceptualize policy and create good policy and recommend different types of actions, having been at COP26 just a few months earlier, was immensely useful in just kind of understanding the process, understanding some of the top issues, understanding as well how advocacy can influence the process. Prior to my current job, which is more research focused, I was doing community organizing and more localized advocacy. And I think, one thing that folks talk about all the time in that field is the challenge of burnout, and just how you're working really hard day to day, but maybe you don't see how that work is translating up into larger change. And I think that can be a real challenge. But seeing at COP how the civil society rallied together, and you heard about advocacy initiatives from around the world and could kind of see the collective, and the bigger picture was very kind of reinvigorating. And so I think for folks who are working more at the local level, it can be kind of like a framework shift or a re-inspiration to get back home and to get back to work, after leaving an experience like this. So those are kind of two takeaways for me.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I want to, it's clear that in each of your lives, this has become this. By this, I mean being intentional and purposeful and active as it relates to caring for creation and addressing climate change concerns. This is more than a vacation at a UN conference. It has mattered and has shaped you in lots of ways. I want to, for people who don't know as much about CCOP itself, the Christian Climate Observers Program itself, I've heard some people describe it, actually Lowell, who's one of the founders of it, describe it as it's a bed and a badge. You get a bed, like as in if you're a participant in CCOP, you get the logistics of where do I stay and how do I transport to and from the venue. Like some of that gets handled for you. And when you show up to the venue, you've got the badge that is required in order for you to actually enter, like to get access. So that's what CCOP is. But I think CCOP is quite a bit more than that. At least my experience of it, it certainly has been. So I'm curious if you can say a little bit more about, like, you've had this experience at the COP, but what about this group that you were there with? You were there with a group that is part of this program called the Christian Climate Observers Program. What do you say about that program, and how would you describe it to somebody who's maybe heard all this stuff about like where you came from and the impact that it's had in your life and the people you've met and so forth, and so they're intrigued, they're kind of interested, but why this program, and what should they know about it if they're interested in potentially applying? By the way, applications are open right now for the next month, so you should apply. For this one, I want to start with you, Monica.
Yes, I was a little bit surprised to hear who this quote was attributed to, given that Lowell is one of the founders and architects of this initiative. I would say that as someone who's been trying to navigate this intersection of faith and creation care and vocation for most of my young adult and adult life, the community at CCOP I felt was a special and unique aspect of this is not just a place to stay and a badge. There is we are going with others who my cohort was mostly North Americans, but most of us who probably would have been the odd person out in our congregation or church, suddenly there's 10, 15, 20 of us all in the same room who have a passion, who have a high degree of care and concern, and in some ways have a bit of sometimes the struggle is lonely, right? And it's not just a matter of misery loves company, but the struggle can be a lonely one. And to meet people who have also been working in this space and seeking colleagues, seeking sojourners, seeking friends has been a special one. So I've kept in touch with a couple of people since CCOP, and I count those ladies as my friends. We actually also had the same experience of rooming together as roommates for the entire week that we were sharing our badges, so to speak, amongst the delegates. So I would consider those three ladies as my friends and as my colleagues and as my sojourners, and as people that I've kept in touch with 4 years on. So it might sound sentimentalist, and I don't mean to reduce it to that, type of sentimentality. However, I would say that depending on your background, your Christian tradition, maybe your current church environment, choosing to engage in climate care is a very specific ministry niche that not everyone that you currently journey with, as well intentioned as they are, can maybe specifically understand what it's like to be in your shoes. And I found that CCOP was an opportunity to meet community and to meet people who knew what it was like to walk in these shoes, whether it's in church advocacy or being in the public square or being in the marketplace. Having this specific focus and having this specific degree of like care and concern is quite unique, I would say.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I want to finish with Elsa, so I'm going to Sarah next, and Sarah, this is more recent for you, is the most recent for you. What would you say about CCOP to somebody who's intrigued? You've got fellow classmates at Trinity there who who knows, maybe they'll apply this year. What would you say?
Yeah, no, definitely apply. this for me, similar to Monica, was amazing community wise. I'd say at my, in my city, I think it's very much a Christian perspective that climate change isn't discussed. And so I relate to that kind of outsider feeling. And so just going there and leading every day with devotions and having someone that at any point in time, anyone in your group is interested in discussing the same kind of topics you are, was very transformational. I don't even think the experience would be at all what it was if I went with a different program, because CCOP was just that great and influential in terms of how to process what we're seeing each day. When I was hearing about floods that people were experiencing that were so traumatizing and completely destroying their homes, and you just feel like, wow, I'm really doing nothing, and what can I be doing about that? And you could have these amazing conversations with Brian and Lowell, did a great job just taking it home and talking about how as Christians, this is part of our responsibility too. I was talking to one man on the bus when I was in Egypt. He's an Australian man, and I said I came with a Christian organization, and he said, why would Christians come to a climate change conference? And that was so funny because I accept climate change or study it because I'm Christian. So it was funny to hear it from the perspective that has no connection. And so I had a great discussion with him, but I really appreciated the CCOP devotions every morning. I brought that into our conversation because they did a great job. And anyone interested in applying, I'd say, you said like who would be a good applicant, and I really think if you value your faith and you want to make a huge difference within your own community, within your own understanding of climate change and how that works together, this is a great program for you. And I can imagine you'll meet some amazing friends who you'll probably keep in touch with for hopefully a long time, who share the same kind of ideas.
Oh, that's sweet, Sarah. Thanks. Now, Elsa, I'm asking you this question to you last. This is one I was intentional about because I know that you attended and you were a participant in CCOP, and then you became you joined the team. You're part of the team now that runs and helps make CCOP happen. So that you've got a different perspective now because of that. So what would you say? How would you describe CCOP, and how would you what sort of person would you recommend it to? And to those that are intrigued, how would you draw them in?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the reason why I was so drawn back to the CCOP program was, in addition to all the reasons that were mentioned already, that I felt that it was genuinely a challenge. And I think that there were a lot of really challenging questions that were asked and conversations that were had. And I mentioned repentance in an earlier question, but I think coming into this space as the faith community, there's a lot of opportunity to really wrestle with our own responsibility, our own culpability in this crisis, the kinds of like real and transformative change we're looking to create, the grief that's involved, and then sort of what the next steps are going forward. And so I felt like in my experience at COP26, I was really challenged by the scripture that we read and discussed together, the questions that folks asked, and the conversations we had, and was similarly challenged at COP27 as well. And I think someone I would encourage to apply to the CCOP program is someone with questions, because I think that kind of exploration, examination, maybe even doubt, whether that be doubt related to faith or doubt related to climate, is welcome in this space and something that we can work through as a community. And so I think that's another group I would add to the list is, if you feel like you have questions and you're open to being challenged in this space, then definitely apply. And that's why I think it's worth investing, the time into putting this together. And I'm continually blown away by, the folks who've been doing this now for years in terms of putting together this kind of program over and over again, and keeping a coalition of organizations together, which it can be a massive challenge when everyone has their own schedules and priorities. But I think it illustrates that everyone who's bought into this sees its value. And so that's kind of my highest praise for the program.
Yeah, thank you. I have a young nephew. He's maybe a little young yet. He's 16, 17. I don't know, maybe he could. But I want to show him this video because I'm like, you should do this. I think you'd really benefit from this. And I really appreciate the way you guys have described some of that. So this time I'm gonna go around with kind of two questions. But this is sort of like our final round here. So one is basic, like, is there anything you haven't said yet that you want to say? So there's that. But I definitely want you to engage with the idea of hope. Also, you just mentioned the reality and experience of eco-anxiety or grief. These are, by all accounts and by reported studies, these experiences are on the rise. They're being had by many people. So the question about hope is definitely relevant. Now, I want to be careful about this one. Little Rick hobby horse here is, I think usually or often when people are asked, like, what gives you hope as it relates to ecological climate concerns, I think when I hear people ask that, I think what they really want is they want to feel better. They don't want to feel bad anymore. They don't want to feel scared anymore. They want to feel better. And I'm going to put that and say, well, yeah, what gives you optimism? What are the reasons, are there things that you see that give you reason for some optimism, that help you feel optimistic? That's one question. But so you can answer that. But I actually also want to ask, like, and I want to hear from you, like, what do you do? What are actions that you take? What are behaviors that you've cultivated that help you embody hope? So not just feel hopeful. I'm gonna switch that and say, like, more like, that's the feeling optimistic side. But what do you do that helps to bring more hope into the world? Like, it embodies it manifests hope in a way that I think resonates with Christ and the way that Christ embodies hope. So, couple of complicated way of asking what gives you hope. Like, I'm asking, like, what are some things that maybe allow you to feel a little bit more optimistic, but also, like, what do you do? What are actions you take that embody hope? And then if there's anything that's like, you haven't had a chance to say yet that you'd like to add, then feel free to do that. So this one, Sarah, how about we start with you on this one?
Yeah, I feel like, truthfully, I don't have so much to say for what gives me optimism, because I'm sometimes in that same place where I think about it too much, of where we're at. But I know that one thing that I remind myself of is the people who are trying their best to make a difference. And that's really what we can do. And just the hope is that more people can be included in that. But yeah, I think prayer is very helpful for me. And I just remind myself that as one person, I can do what one person can do. But I try to look at the world as if I'm more than one person, and try to take actions that can add up to be something that I can feel morally good about. So what I do, I wouldn't say this is the most important thing, this is what everyone needs to be doing, but this is some things that I incorporate in my day-to-day life just to give me a sense of optimism. I prioritize what I was saying about composting. I prioritize not wasting food in general at all. I eat plant-based. If friends don't finish their meals, I ask them either, can you take us leftovers? Can I have it? Can I share it with friends? Because I think that every meal adds up. And if one person's mentioning it as part of the culture, it's just like, eat your meal, you're done, throw away the rest that's at the table. And I don't think that's something that we should be continuing. planting native species, removing invasive or non-native species in your garden, or reporting invasive species that you see can be huge for taking care of the biodiversity in your area. Cleaning up your environment. Everyone's busy, but if you have any time and you're just want to talk with a friend, you can walk alongside really anywhere and just pick up trash you see, obviously with gloves or something that's not going to introduce any harm to your body. But making your money count and speaking up to people who have some sort of impact and have some sort of platform is always something that can be useful if you feel confident. But of course, just doing what you can do, and if you're going to be suggesting something to someone else, making sure that something that you would consider yourself, so that you can feel some optimism towards this world that a lot of us are really trying our best to make it a healthy place for all of us.
Thanks, Sarah. Elsa, how about you?
Yeah, absolutely. I also want to just shout out this question in the chat and the great response that just came in about like normalizing the conversation about climate change. I spoke about my trip to go to COP26 at my home church that I grew up in, when that was happening, and so many people came up to me afterwards, especially parents of like teenage aged kids, and said like, my son or daughter is really interested in this issue, but I never knew we could talk about it in church, and like, quite frankly, I don't really know what climate change is. So like, this was kind of the first time they felt they had permission to talk about it, whereas like their kids were really learning a lot about it and very concerned about it. So I think normalizing that conversation and whatnot is towards the hopeful direction as well. But I think in terms of embodying hope, I love the practice of composting, and for me it feels like a spiritual meditative practice, a liturgy maybe. It's something that I actually picked up for the first time in Jerusalem when I was studying abroad, and took on the composting for the compound there, and would walk out looking over Bethlehem, usually as the call to prayer was ringing out, and the bright moon was overhead, and there's a lot to wrestle with in that part of the world. And I felt that composting was a grounding practice, acknowledging that, you know, death does exist, and it's something we encounter day to day. I mean, just the death of food waste, but that there is kind of that hope on the other side. There's life that comes from that decomposition, and that we are part of a cycle of death and rebirth, and not just death as the end. And so that kind of ties, you know, the spirituality with the practice of hope for me. And I've continued to hold on to that throughout the pandemic, you know, bringing composting to my home. And, you know, now I feel like that's a grounding practice for me wherever I am. It's also a practice of humility, you know, just not being afraid to get a little bit dirty for the sake of the greater good. So, you know, I think that's one way I think of hope, in a very small sense, but it translates up in a lot of ways, especially as we have to encounter and come to terms with death in so many different ways. I think that's a massive part of spirituality, but also of ecology and hope in the climate crisis.
Yes, indeed. Thanks, Elsa. I've started to grow some tomato plants and a few other vegetables in a little box outside our window, and compost is a crucial element. They wouldn't grow without the compost, but it does require death to get there. What about you, Monica?
Yeah, Sarah and Elsa have shared some very beautiful practical examples of acts of hope that we can all take in our lives, and you know, the lives of our households, which I think is so I won't sort of repeat what was shared over there. I think those are very good practical tips for people that also answer, I think, one of the questions in the chat. I would just say that when I need to sort of find grounding, because it's true, when you work in this field, there's a lot of sobering news reports. There's hundreds of pages of PDFs for anybody who wants to dive more into exactly the sobering realities. I also just make it a practice once in a while to go back to the area where I grew up. I mentioned the 7 to 8 kilometers of municipal park around the Burrard Inlet, where I learned to sail, and where I was first introduced to creation care. And every once in a while, I just take a retreat for myself, a half a day or a full day retreat, and just walk through that part of the watershed, walk through those favorite places that that have inspired, my love for creation, and motivate me as to why I'm doing what I'm doing, why, sort of why I sit in these board meetings, why I sit in these work meetings, and why I do what I do. And oftentimes you sort of find that it's not so much we all experience God in different ways. For some people, it's reading scripture in quiet, or more quiet prayer. I find that for myself, taking the time to slow down, meditatively walk through that park, observe what I see around me, even taking the time to even count, oh, how many heron nests will I see today? How many are the blackberry bushes that we've been removing along the trail? Are they still there? Have they grown back? Pausing at the creek that is going into Burrard Inlet, where we release salmon from the hatchery. Just taking those moments to be reminded of this is God's world that we love, and that gives me just the motivation. That gives me the grounding and the reminding of when I sit in board meetings, and when I sit in work meetings, and doing the tasks of creation care, that can feel challenging and difficult, and
Yes, indeed. There's
on that.
nothing. Sorry, I missed that.
Well, I was just gonna say, I think I'll just end on that note.
There is nothing like the direct engagement. Like, I can watch a video about elephants, but there's something different about like looking at even something as you might call plain, as an American robin that's right in front of me, or the Anna's hummingbird that's at the feeder on my deck. Like, there's something different about that direct engagement, and I wholeheartedly commend that as one practice that can really help. Well, I think we have pretty much come to the end here. So just a little bit of a few housekeeping bits. First off, I just want to put in the chat a few things. Let's see if I can get this there. Yeah. So a few things that have been mentioned, a few organizations, Climate Intercessors, CCOP, of course, but also Climate Stewards is got really good stuff to do with climate change. Again, the websites for Rocha Canada and Rocha Global, if you want to find out more about them. So recommend those. Just thank you so much to Elsa, Sarah, and Monica for joining us today. It's really heartening to hear some of your stories and see what God is doing in your life and through your lives. So ever since you were participated in CCOP, but even now in an ongoing way, really heartening. So appreciate that. We have mentioned there will be a recording, so you can stay tuned for that. I don't know exactly when the next Rocha talk will be. If you got any good ideas, let me know, and I'd be happy to see if we can make another one happen. I think, what else am I forgetting? I think that's it. I think with that, I wanted to ask Monica if you wouldn't mind offering a prayer of blessing for us as we wrap up.
Certainly. Let's bow our heads and take a moment to pray. Creator God, we thank you for your beautiful gift of the created world. We thank you for the imagination, creativity, and the different concerns that you've placed in all of our different hearts that are related to creation care, whether it is climate and health, whether it's peace and justice, whether it's public policy and the specific mechanics of specific mechanisms of public policy, or whichever other areas and giftings that you've placed in our lives, that we can all contribute to your kingdom. we recognize that as human beings, we have a long ways to go, and there are many things that we can continue to do to turn our hearts, to change our postures, and to change our actions to love your created world. We thank you for this Christian Climate Observers program. We thank you for the people who have come to the webinar today, and to those who will be watching online or watching online afterwards. We pray that the stories, the experiences, and the testimonies shared today will inspire all of your people to care for creation in the spheres and in areas where you've called them to be. We thank you for your grace towards us, even when we feel that our efforts can only take us so far. We thank you that you, Jesus, fill in the gaps, you fill in the rest, and that you have a greater plan for the redemption of your people and your planet, and that we get to play a part in this, and we get to be a part of contributing to it. Thank you, Lord, for this day, and we just want to say a word of encouragement and to say a word of exhortation for those who are considering applying to the program. In your name, amen.
Amen. Well, I think that's a wrap, folks.